All right, what's up, Conquer family? We have the Conquer coaches here. Welcome to our town hall. Today, we are diving into one of your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about how do you design Metcons for your athletes per week, per month, and do you use mixed training to improve your ability in the sport? So, what we're going to do, we're going to kind of touch on our own unique flows of how we approach mixed modal training, how we think about writing Metcons, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, Jared, with that being said, I'm going to let you kind of tackle this one first, and then we'll rock and roll.
Sure. When it comes to laying out training, personally, I like doing things in like 4 to 6 week blocks, but that's always dependent upon the time of the year, where they're at in their competition season, whether they're gearing up for maybe a separate competition that exists outside of the CrossFit season. And then during that time, there'll be certain things that we like to focus on. So, right now it's been really, really hot for a lot of my athletes. So we've been shifting more toward like rowing and biking because it's just not feasible for them to be out running during those times. So, laying out what we want to accomplish within that 4 to 6 week block will ultimately determine the movements that we choose. So, I do like a lot of variety, but if I find that an athlete is really struggling with, I have a couple that are struggling with high volume dumbbell snatches. Like they're going to see them every single week, week to week, and some sort of logical progression that either adds volume for them or it adds, a layer of intensity prior to, or it might be interference that gets put within that workout. So there's a lot of little components that can go in there. But yeah, it just typically depends on time of the year, the block of training that we're working on specifically, and that'll always dictate the things that we want to focus on.
Cool. So, interference, definitely something I think we definitely need to talk about. But Leisha, can you kind of talk about or expand maybe upon a little bit like how you approach assessment for mixed modal and like talk about what's enough what's like enough touch points throughout the week or the month that you would consider kind of minimum effective dose if there's like something specific you're trying to improve.
Sure. So to piggyback off of Jared, it is very personal, what people's strengths and weaknesses are. I've done a little bit of research on even like if the athlete has a particular history, a sports background history, if they were, fast twitch or sprinter or rugby player, football player, how long they can be under some load or tension with like mixed modal stuff, right? I feel like a lot of people struggle with that interference with gymnastics in, let's say, like an echo bike. So the first thing to do is if, depending on the time of the year, if they're coming off the open, you already have like a great set of tests that they've demonstrated, and then you can build on some progressions to make improvements either on specific things. Like I know for a lot of folks, the combination of the shuttle run, burpee pull up really messed people up a couple of years ago in the open. And it's really surprising because it was like, it's fairly simple movements. And the burpee pull up I think when your pull-ups are strong, doing a burpee into a pull-up is almost like a jumping pull-up. And I think where it really got to people is the shuttle running. So that level of conditioning and that turning around, and then it becomes in like efficiency. So looking at all of that, looking at the data that you have prior, and if you don't have any data, taking a week or 2 weeks to actually test some of these things, and see where some of the weakness falls. For some people, it will be anything that's like diaphragmatic compression. So like thrusters, wall balls, burpee box jumps. I feel like that is, a lot of folks suffer with some of that stuff. And then you move into like more complicated things like the gymnastics pieces. So it's such a mixed bag, and it's trying to be as smart as possible to build a program that's going to touch on, you can't touch on all the points, but I like to go into like, if you're going to squat, you're going to end up doing something more explosive through box jumps. to try to continue on building strength and the twitch through the legs, and then move into like a push day. So handstand push-ups and perhaps like clean and jerks. Just mixing up every single day with a component of a little bit of strength, then refining some of the skill. And I really love doing building pieces. So meaning a test, like if they have muscle ups per se, and maybe one or two building some types of workouts that are like EMOMs, where you're mixing a little interference with the echo bike, like let's say 12-minute EMOM, so you're not totally like destroying them, and giving them a number of calories or even a recovery echo, and then moving them into like manageable sets and continue to build on that, or pauses, more strict movement. I
Well,
mean, it's wild. Like there's so much. This is
oh
one of
yeah.
the beauties of CrossFit or training this style, is that there are so many parts, and it really is athlete dependent on the parts that you want to develop or train in.
No, I think you definitely touched on some key points of, so when you're talking about building, are you talking about like building intensities and kind of learning, pacing strategies and kind of like finding your different gears? Is that what you're talking about there?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I think that, with finding pacing, there has to be a strategy. And with pacing and strategies are like building a certain amount of reps for the athlete. There's also like, I think, a mindset shift that has to change too, which is confidence building. It's another third tier to add to
Sure.
that. So, um, yeah, I don't,
No, I
yeah.
like it. Yeah. I like where you're going with that. Um, I think, again, I think you touched on some really key points talking about metabolic fatigue, and then we talk about like localized muscular fatigue. I think those are really two areas that tend to get overlooked in mixed modal training, or writing of metcons. And something we don't always consider is movement selection or movement limitation. Like, what is the thing that's actually creating the limiter? Is it a high heart rate that's creating the limiter, or is it just the total amount of volume you're doing that's creating a very localized muscular fatigue? And being able to dissect that data either through conversation or through the feedback you're getting, which for me personally always comes down to what kind of questions are we asking our athletes, right? Like, just putting an arbitrary workout up there and then getting some general feedback of time is not always enough. We have to like really dig into that next layer of the onion to figure out where we're going. So I like where you're going with all of that. And I think where I want to go next is, can you kind of give us, I'm going to ask both you guys this question, kind of a bullet list of, when you're thinking about progressing people, in a Metcon, what sort of principles are you really looking for? Or what are kind of some like key points that you'd want to make sure we can check that box before we move in?
Hmm.
I'll give you mine first because I knew I was going to ask this question. So I'll give you
Okay.
mine to give you guys a second to kind of think about this. So when I'm thinking about structuring training, the first thing I always think about is strength and position. So
Mhm.
positional endurance, I think, is one of the most underutilized, underthought about principles within the sport and even in strength and condition. If we can't maintain the most fundamental positions, how are we ever going to truly express the highest level of fitness with the highest quality? So I have to make sure, no matter the level of athlete, they meet a certain criteria of positional endurance, or structural or strength endurance, whatever you want to call it. And then once I can check that box, we talk about movement efficiency. And it's like, can the athlete actually do the movement I'm asking them to do efficiently? Or is there some sort of movement breakdown that we need to fix before we do this thing? So those are kind of my like A and B, bottom, either bottom of the barrel or top of the list, like highest priority, whatever. I want to make sure those, I can check that box. And then I want to look at volume threshold which is session and weekly volume threshold. So what can this athlete actually handle in a session, and what can they handle throughout the week, right? Like kind of what is their baseline right now? And then you have to look at what is the threshold volume of the sport? Like what is the highest level of the sport, or at least their level, you know, if they're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, kind of what does that baseline threshold look like? Once I have that, I can start looking at set volume and where is this athlete currently at, right? So we see common tests like, you know, 30 muscle ups per time, start with your max unbroken, and then finish out the reps, right? So that gives us insight into, okay, this is their high end of set volume. And it also gives us insight into repeatability under fatigue, right? So another key data point that I want to look at when I'm progressing this. And then, like I touched on, I start having a conversation, or at least generating some, you know, easy couplets where I rotate, you know, maybe machines where the gymnastics piece stays the same, but the, you know, monostructural portion of it varies, right? So now I'm starting to see, is there one thing that creates more metabolic fatigue that has an impact on that gymnastics thing? And then localized fatigue. So if I just do a bunch of them, right? Like what happens? What blows up? You know, what specific area of the body blows up first? And I can kind of either look at, is this a strength issue, or is just, you know, we're really riding the line of what their functional volume is. Okay. And then last but not least, I look at complementary and non-complementary movements. So are we pairing movements together that support progression, or are we pairing movements together that create interference? And we all know both are beneficial based on certain points of the year and what the demand of the sport is. But if we're trying to progress from a capacity standpoint, non-complementary pairings are not always the most effective, right? So that's my list. Is it so? Feel free, add anything to that. Is there anything you guys don't agree with in that list? Like, I think it's all beneficial conversation.
For sure. I think when it comes down to the sport, and I think something that actually gets overlooked and I would consider, you know, the buzz phrase, I feel like of the month is the low hanging fruit is efficiency and movement. I think that when you get, let's say the CrossFit Open comes up, or quarterfinals, you get a footprint of what the setup should look like. Now that's fine. Everything's fine. You got measurements of this, that, whatever. However, this like steps, I'm going to go back to burpee box jumps, for instance, or step overs, however you look at it. The efficiency in foot movement alone is, you could add 20, 30 seconds to like something that's like 15-minute AMRAP. You can add so much time back to that athlete just by simply saying, hey, like as a coach, there's certain workouts I'm like, hey, I want to film this whole workout for me. Open up WODProof or whatever app you use. Film this whole thing for me. Send me the link. I want to watch you, how you move efficiently through this entire workout, from the bar to how long you're resting, et cetera, et cetera. And then really try to hone in on specifics like footwork, like putting chalk in your britches. Like you have to go rope climb to like the shuttle run. I know I had to do that at quarterfinals a few years ago. Like little tips and tricks, I think, can really save an athlete a lot of time and thinking to that. I would call myself like a more heady type of coach. I really get into the mindset of like where you can make like the most bang for your buck at the cheapest expense. It's not going to cost you a lot physically to do these things. It's just a refinement of these things. I think is super, super helpful.
I like it. Jared, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the hardest part about progressing, whatever it is, right? And I think gymnastics may be one of the, because I think strength, at least from my perspective, is a little more straightforward. But you know, if we're trying to improve someone's, let's say, you know, you alluded to muscle ups, which, you know, I like that because 30 has always been like the baseline number. it is far from the top end of what a high level athlete should be able to do. But for 90% of the people, like getting 30 muscle ups and doing that in the workout and being able to do that without having to resort to singles, like it's a pretty big win for them. Um, but the hardest part is trying to lay out progressions and scenarios where they can find success and you're still challenging them, because it's really easy to lay out a progression that looks great on paper, and for whatever reason, whether it's they have their own mental obstacles to overcome with, maybe you pair it with muscle ups and rowing, and they've already told themselves that they're a bad rower, and they go from row to the muscle ups and they already have apprehension. So that's to me one of the more challenging parts, is just trying to lay out a progression where that it makes sense logically, that it's going to continue to push them to improve, but there's also a really high chance of them finding success, as opposed to, here's a 20 rep cycle, just go do it, you're going to get stronger. Well, like maybe not. We want to continue to build their confidence, so whenever they swing for the fences on like a max of the ring muscle ups again, if you test that they feel confident. Yeah, I'm going to go past 8, 10. I'm going to go to 15 and 20. But with so many different elements, as you alluded to, and I really like the fact you talked about, like, bike one week or ski or row, and comparing those and seeing what ends up being the, not necessarily limiter, but what it ends up showing maybe a limitation, is great. But it's just a matter of, finding the right one that allows them to progress before I start introducing too many different variables that will affect their psyche, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches make workouts complex for the sake of looking good on paper, but they make them so complex but that you can't actually pull any meaningful data from it, because there's just so much interference within it. And so, like, for that example, at least in my experience, I think as I've aged as a coach, I've started to realize a little bit more that progression or progressive overload is important, but it's not as, you don't have to prescribe it quite as quickly. Like a lot of strength coaches, it's like week over week over week, like loads are like consistently going up and things like that. And from a gymnastics standpoint, I've actually found that counterproductive in their overall progression, especially in the sport, where in my example of changing the monostructural piece, I'll keep the gymnastics volume totally the same. And times will just go down because their, we'll call it athlete IQ, just gets better. Like they just learn how to manage that amount of volume better, right? So you're still getting to see kind of the metabolic effect or the metabolic interaction of whatever machine you're using, but they're just going to get more efficient at tolerating that volume. And that's something I feel like does not get talked about nearly enough, is you don't have to consistently make them harder. You want them to just get faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do similar stuff around a lot of gymnastics. Is probably, I mean, it's so relevant in the sport. Like handstand push-ups, for instance, I will work around, depending on the athlete, if they're not quite at that like historic 30 rep number, they're close, let's say 25 reps. I will use 25 reps and I will cut it up a million different ways over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, just to find, well, one, to give them exposure to that volume total, but also that interference or that building or that learning IQ. Like if you walk the same route every day at the same time, there is a point where you can close your eyes and you can feel that walk. And I think the same is true when you start moving through certain specific workouts. I think the problem is the redundancy that has to happen to get better. And I think that some athletes, they want to see this like constantly varied movement all the time. And it's like, you really, like, you need to get better at X, and then, Y then becomes easier. But like, let's focus on this. And then for that, and I think that, it comes back to like the magic pill. It's not all going to happen at once. And there's always that time, that season of putting the right things in place, especially like if you're coming off of your season and moving through, you work on the things that take the longest, maybe first, and then everything else, like back to the low hanging fruit, you start attacking that closer and closer to whatever you're into, like the local comps or the bigger qualifiers throughout the season.
Great. All right, so let's put a bow on this. We've kind of gone over some general progression strategies, kind of some ideas I think people should be thinking about when writing programs. Jared, you kind of alluded to, 4 to 6 week blocks or things like that. I think let's wrap this up with a little conversation around interference, especially in the world of templates. We see a lot of programs that are like, okay, you're going to do some aerobic work, like maybe some monostructural work. Then you're going to do some gymnastics accumulation. Then you're going to do some weightlifting. Then you're going to do some absolute strength. What do you like? Do you guys feel like that's appropriate for the sport? Do you feel like it's creating too much interference and it actually creates a slower progression overall, right? Right? Like you're still making progress, but you're making progress at a much slower rate versus kind of what you're talking about, Lesha, of dialing in on some key points of things we want to improve and maybe working on shorter cycles, and you eventually touch everything throughout the year, but you have like 4-week blocks of very specific time that you're trying to improve, a couple things versus the gamut.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You can
All
tell
right,
me.
I'll go first on that one. So I hate saying it depends, but I feel like that's always the right answer, right?
Sure.
It depends. I would say for the middle group, the intermediate athlete who can do most things but struggles with certain skills, you can't do 20 things. They don't have the capacity, number one, to handle all that, and then number two, they probably don't even have the mental capacity to be able to focus on all those things. Like if I were to compare this to something like jujitsu, if somebody showed me like 20 things in one class, like I'm not remembering anything by the time I get home, like nothing. And it's the reason why like we'll end up spending weeks of time on one particular thing or one particular position because it allows you to improve there. Now at the black belt level, it doesn't matter because you've seen enough of those things, you can kind of touch it here and there and still remember that. And I feel like that's what it comes down to for like the higher level athlete. They don't necessarily need to hit legless rope climbs every single week because they've done enough legless rope climbs. It's better for them to have this. They can have a broader spectrum of things versus a intermediate athlete who is going to benefit from those touch points. And just like you said, they're just going to get better by doing it more. If they never try handstand walking, but whenever they feel like trying it, of course, when they kick up, they're going to fall down. But if they did it 2 times a week for 6 weeks in a row, like they're going to get better. Even if it only means moving 10 feet at a time, they're going to get better. So I think I got off on a tangent on that one, but
No, I like it. So
Same.
I think what I'm hearing from you, so at the higher levels, do you think it's more important to focus on contraction volume from a pattern perspective versus a specific exercise selection? Or exercise volume, I should say.
I think provided some of the things we talked about are already in place, like movement efficiency, movement quality, that volume is going to be their key to uh, to improving at a faster rate. It doesn't mean volume for the sake of volume. It means tolerate and recover from, but also matching what the needs of the sport are. So like honest to God, doing like 100 toes to bar in a workout shouldn't be that big of a deal for an advanced athlete, but an intermediate athlete, that's a lot of toes to bar. Ring muscle ups 30 is the baseline for a lot of people, but for an advanced athlete, it's probably closer to 60. Not necessarily in the same workout, but maybe in the course of a whole week, it might be closer to, depending on what they need to work on, 60 to 80, maybe even a little bit higher, depending on again the need of where they find their weakness. But yeah, from my perspective, it does come down to volume and less about the specific things, unless a particular workout has highlighted a strong deficiency which needs attention, in which case then they might have a little 4 to 6 week block that allows them just to hone in on those particular skills or that particular movement.
I like it. I've got my opinion about it, but I'll let you, Lesher, what do you think? What do you think about
I
that?
so back to the original topic, which is, you know, like looking at how things are spelled out for the average athlete, like via template or whatever. I think, you know, depending on where you are, if you are an intermediate, probably anything is going to work. You're getting exposure. You hopefully you will, you know, listen to your body about or there's levels within the program that can help you kind of make some adjustments where needed. But it depends. It comes back to coming in, like I've been saying this a lot lately, which is like the fastest way to meet your goals is to hire a coach that's going to break you down, listen to data to analyze, and with and elegantly put something together for you that will progress you much faster than doing just something like bare bones or blank, like generic GPP kind of stuff, but for more. Um, I think that if you have a specific competition that you're looking for in terms of training, I always look back again, more historical data. You know, this competition is heavy on sandbags, you know, maybe taking a couple weeks to start working on the sandbags, or we know that there's always a trail run at this event. So start working on little pieces like that, doing some digging and some research, and then adding in pieces that I think, and you know, it's a lot of it is guesswork, but bringing things to the table that will advance the athlete or have them prepared enough for said competition. But again, like if you start exposing higher level athletes, they don't need to do legless rope climbs every single week per se. You can mix it up with weighted rope climbs or body weight rope climbs, or one legless to regular and an EMOM. Yeah, it depends.
I like it. Yeah, I think the only thing I was going to add to your comment, Jared, is I agree. Like volume is important, but slow volume doesn't fucking matter.
Right.
In our sport, it just doesn't matter. So for the athletes that are clamoring about more volume, more volume, more volume, all right, well, what does a moderate set look like and how fast can you get it done? I think that's a better overall indicator of where the athlete's at versus just giving an athlete, 5 rounds of, 20 toes to bar and, whatever, a 20 cal ski or something like that, right? Like if that takes you 20 minutes, we should probably cut back and focus more on the speed of things than actually just adding volume. So, okay, I think we hit the nail on the head. I'm good with that. We're real quick going to touch on, do you guys use mixed training to improve your ability in the sport? I feel like this one's going to be pretty easy to answer. So whoever wants to take it first.
I'm again, I'll go into the assumption that it's mixed modal training to improve the sport. And I don't see how you would not do that to get better. You can't play baseball to get better at football. You have to do CrossFit to get better at CrossFit. So yeah, I don't think I need to add on to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything?
same. Unless they have an interest of something outside of CrossFit that gives them almost like that mental break, then I say, yeah, absolutely go for it.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have nothing else to
Pickleball.
add. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'd be fun to watch someone try to do it,
Yeah.
so. All right, guys. Well, that's our town hall for this month. Make sure submit your questions for next month, and we'll make sure to get them answered and get you guys educated. So thanks, guys, for taking the time.
Thanks for
Hit us
having
up
us.
if you guys have any questions.
Okay.